In and of itself, this is not a game changer. This is probably more than anything else what in the military terms would be called a shaping operation, preparing the battlefield for the inevitable and probably looming Ukrainian counteroffensive. Instead, this is really a chance to do two things. One is to rattle the Russians, make them worried about the possibility of risings amongst their own people, but secondly, force the Russians to disperse their troops, to move some of their reinforcements towards Belgorod region. Hopefully, I think Ukraine must hope, opening up areas for sort of a major attack in the next week or so. These Russian volunteer forces, they cover a whole variety of different political perspectives. There are liberals and anarchists all the way through to neo-Nazis. And in their own way, they all have a reason for wanting to see the current Russian regime fall. So yes, absolutely, they're hoping that in some small way they can contribute to the downfall of the Putin regime. But at the same time, we have to realize that these are not independent forces. Although the claim is, Kyiv is saying this is nothing to do with us, these are just Russian volunteers, they are controlled by Ukrainian military intelligence. They rely on the Ukrainians for weapons and support and such like. So in some ways, they are accepting that they are part of the Ukrainian war effort simply because they believe that a Russian defeat in Ukraine hastens the downfall of the regime in Moscow. I think that's the one key thing that brings them all together. They all want to see the Putin regime fall. It's quite noteworthy, after all, that they have adopted the white, blue, white flag, which has been used by some anti-Putin forces. It's basically it's the Russian flag, but without the red, without the blood in it or whatever. Again, trying to give it some kind of fairly neutral identity so that it can attract volunteers from all over. And I think in the long term, they are hoping that as they get more Russian prisoners of war and perhaps even Russians defecting across the lines, what they can do is actually begin to swell these forces with former Russian soldiers. At the moment, that hasn't been happening, but that seems to be a kind of a long-term plan. I don't think just simply taking the credit away from Putin for taking Bakhmut is enough reason to launch this kind of an incursion. This must have been sometime in preparation and be being done for a strategic reason. One thing we do know, after all, is that the Ukrainians so far, they've not only outfought the Russians, they've also outthought the Russians. They've been very good at creating all kinds of feints, subterfuges, and psychological operations to keep the Russians, off guard. And I think that's really what we're seeing now. My guess would be, and all it can be is a guess, is that they will want to hold on a little while longer just to make the point, and also just to be all the more embarrassing for Moscow and more of a distraction, and then try to withdraw in good order. This is one of the essences of a raid, and this is a raid after all, is that you want to stay long enough to do as much damage as you can, but not so long that you get trapped and can't withdraw. So it's going to be a delicate calibration. I reckon that probably, by the end of today, they will already have begun to start moving out. At a time when the Russians seem to think that this is a war that can ultimately be won just simply by mauling Ukrainian cities, the Ukrainians are demonstrating a much, much more sophisticated notion of how you fight a political war inside Russia. And that's why I think we're probably going to see a lot more imaginative and daring operations still to come.